Speak to Sarah Pochin about, who is the former, I was going to say newly elected MP. She's not that newly elected. I mean, a week in politics is like a year at this point. The MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Good morning to you, Sarah.
Good morning, Alex. Nice to be on the show again.
Yeah, lovely to have you. Always lovely to have you. Now, first of all, let's talk. We've had our very own Cardi P, Peter Cardwell, our political editor, grilling the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. And he decided to ask him about when he said that those people calling for a national inquiry into grooming gangs were jumping on a far-right bandwagon. This is what the Prime Minister had to say.
Regret being against an inquiry. You said some of the people calling it were jumping on a right-wing bandwagon. Are you going to apologise for that?
Well, the people I was referring to, and I made this absolutely clear when I said it, were the politicians who had been in power and done absolutely nothing. And then as soon as they're out of power, are screaming and shouting. So Kemi Badenoch, Chris Philp, those individuals, when they were in power, did absolutely nothing. Now, I've been campaigning and working on this for 15 years, and have as many other people. Initially, we were looking at local inquiries, but I asked Louise Casey to just do an audit to assure me there wasn't more that we could do. She's done that. She's written that up. It's a pretty long report. I've read every single word of it. She's recommended a national inquiry. I accept her recommendation. That'll be a statutory inquiry and we'll get on with it. It runs alongside the criminal investigation, by the way. It's very important. It's not one or the other, okay. Because the first route should always be the criminal route, in my view, because where we've got perpetrators that are convicted, they should be in prison.
Sarah, he's lying, isn't he? He's just plain-faced lying to our faces, saying, oh, this was just about the politicians who... I've been working on this for 15 years. Really? Have you? Because as far as I could tell, when they gave local authorities the ability to have local inquiries, only Oldham said they were going to do that, and then the Labour Party themselves blocked them. What are they so scared about?
Well, my first point would be, if he has been working, which he says he has, and we know he has, for 15 years in this area on this topic, why the hell did he need another report to tell him that we needed a statutory investigation and inquiry into this whole issue? If he's been working on it for 15 years, he knows darn well what the problem is, and he should have been shouting loudly for this statutory investigation years ago. So in my view, he has been dragged kicking and screaming to the table, partly because of the stance that reform politicians are taking on this, and also the Tories have got absolutely nothing to be proud of. 14 years they went through it. I mean, at the same time Keir Starmer was around, they would also, doing nothing. So I think there's a lot of people in a lot of very senior positions in Parliament, I should say, that are probably quite concerned now about what's going to come out of the woodwork, let alone people in the police, people in the councils affected, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think we're going to see some real issues coming out, and there's going to be some people really concerned about what we're going to overturn. What we're going to what's the word?
Uncover. You're looking for uncover. I've got it for you there, Sarah. No, okay, but it's true. I think you're absolutely right on this. I think they are petrified, because what we know is most of these atrocities took place in Labour-held constituencies and Labour-run councils, who all turned a blind eye to what was going on, at the very least. And this has got to be one of the most vile, horrible, the most disgusting imaginable scandals. This is essentially a form of sexual genocide. And even now, they're still using terms like, oh, it's British Pakistanis. It's not. It is British Pakistanis, but the common denominator of most of these gang rape perpetrators are the fact that they come from one particular faith, and it is elements of that particular faith which make them regard women in a certain way, which has led to the targeting of vulnerable white girls as part of what is essentially a sexual genocide. And they're still shrinking away from this. Do you have any... I mean, in theory, this national inquiry is supposed to take place over the course of 3 years, which makes it at lightning speed compared to most government inquiries. It is supposed to be statutory, which means people will be compelled to give evidence. It's not going to be voluntary. But my worry is the parameters are going to be set so this doesn't actually investigate the very people who we need to be investigating, which are the people who knew at local council level, the senior police officers who knew, the social workers who helped cover this up, and some of the MPs sitting in that Parliament.
Absolutely. The key to this, Alex, is who is going to be leading this investigation. So we've called, Lee Anderson called in Parliament for it to be Maggie Oliver. Now, I don't know whether that's possible, but she should at least be on this committee or panel or whatever they're going to call themselves. But the point is, somebody like that who resigned in 2012 over these issues and still says today that these issues haven't changed. So she knows exactly what she's talking about. She knows who the perpetrators were, and we need people that have been involved, that have been made to be quiet and keep all of this under wraps. We need those people now to come forward and be part of this investigation, because you're absolutely right. We cannot have another post office scandal. Who has been held to account for that? Nobody yet. We can't have another blood scandal. No, nothing's even happened with that. You know, this cannot be another one of those. I think this is going to be one of the biggest scandals that's going to hit politics because of who's been involved.
Yeah. And the nature of the crimes being committed. I mean, I can't think of a scandal much worse, if I'm honest with you.
And why aren't they called hate crimes, Alex? Why aren't they called out as hate crimes? And I'll tell you why, because it's not white people doing a crime or committing an offence against a minority, because that would be called a hate crime. Look at Lucy Connolly. And yet these British Pakistani men, has anyone called this a hate crime? And yet it's all directed to white British women.
Oh, and we know why, like I was just saying. And no one's actually talking about that, are they? The cultural underpinnings of why certain Muslim men think that it's fair game to target vulnerable young white girls in the most despicable, disgusting way. And, you know, one of the, it wasn't a shock to me, and I doubt it was a shock to you, but one of the most striking remarks in Baroness Casey's reports was the connection between asylum seekers and the perpetrators of rape gang offences. And here we go, still trying to tell the Prime Minister with his cloth ears that this is a risk to women and girls, that you're not smashing the gangs. You've got to protect your population, because Lord knows what you're letting in and who are going to be the victims at the end of all of this when you've brought in men from poor misogynistic countries and expect them to suddenly be able to integrate and, I don't know, sing Kumbaya with a load of OnlyFans models. It's for the birds. And here's Peter Cardwell grilling the Prime Minister on his promise to smash the gangs.
Over 40,000 illegal migrants have arrived in small boats since you've been Prime Minister. It's the worst year on record. Your approach just isn't working, is it?
We're, absolutely serious about the response to what is a serious problem. In the end, the way to deal with this is to bring down the gangs that are running this trade, and it is a trade. They're making huge amounts of money. That's why we are increasing law enforcement powers. There's a bill going through Parliament which will give counter-terrorism powers to our law enforcement, the ability to get in much earlier. We're working with international partners. I raised this in my discussions with the French president when I saw him earlier this week, with the Chancellor in Germany, with the Prime Minister of Italy, because we've got to come down even harder on these gangs. We're determined to do so. I know we've got to do more. That's why I'm working with our partners to do that, particularly in relation to law enforcement in the north of France. And then importantly, where people do come to the country who aren't entitled to be here, processing their claims and then returning them to where they came from. And since we've been in power, 30,000 people who've no right to be in the United Kingdom have now been removed from the United Kingdom because we're processing the claims. It's the highest number for the best part of 10 years. But I accept the challenge. There's more that we've got to do.
What you got to do? What does he want? A sodding Blue Peter badge for deporting 30,000 people? Doesn't even touch the sides, does it, Sarah?
Well, the other thing is that you mentioned the French there, and this 30 is referring to the fact that we're now have got the French to agree to apparently wade out to 300 metres from the shoreline and turn those boats back. Well, we know it's not going to happen. I'll believe that when I see it. But also, this isn't just about National Labour in denial, which they are in denial about these asylum seekers. I'm being attacked locally now by Labour councillors, our Labour PCC, for they're accusing me of saying that, talking untruths through my by-election campaign about the asylum seekers and what's going on in my constituency. But I have evidence, and they will so regret this because we've got evidence. I wouldn't dream of saying anything that I couldn't back up with evidence. I've been a magistrate for 20 years, for goodness sake.
Right, what sort of things are we talking about?
Well, for example, I've spoken about in the constituency, the asylum seekers being moved into houses of multiple occupancy, what it's like for constituents to live next door to that type of property that may have 6, 8, up to 15 men in. I've heard all the stories. I've seen the CCTV of what happens at night, the drug dealing, the intimidation, the knife wielding, the noise, even a story of girls being dropped off in taxis. Now, I've raised this for the residents because Labour are in denial. The residents, one of the reasons they lost in Runcorn was because Labour are denying that this is happening. It is happening. Keir Starmer's denying it at a national level. Labour is denying it. The Labour Council is denying it at a local level. Somebody, and in Runcorn's case, it's me, has to stand up and speak for these residents. But I'm telling you, they've already put Facebook posts out this morning about saying that, I'm making all this up. The comments that come back saying, thank goodness someone is finally speaking up for us. This is not a lie. I'm living next door to one. I'm terrified. The stories are there for people to see. But Labour think that, if they just keep going down with this rhetoric, that they're going to silence people like me. Well, they're not going to silence people like me.
I don't know what sort of perverse, weird individual in politics seems to think that actually putting a protective blanket around misogynistic, violent young men who have broken illegally into the country is more important than protecting women and girls. It's a sickness.
I've had rapes by asylum seekers in my constituency. They're under arrest. They know it's factual. They're accusing me of making up stuff that hasn't been reported to the police. It has been reported to the police, and the police crime commissioner says he doesn't know anything about it. Well, that just probably sums up the police crime commissioner, doesn't it?
They're lying to us. They're gaslighting us. Honestly, I think this subject could see the government fall. So keep on it, Sarah. Now, let's talk about the assisted dying bill, because that's got a very significant vote today in Parliament. It could see its very own demise if MPs decide not to back it. There's talk of MPs who backed it previously changing their mind, getting a bit squeamish because of the lack of particular safeguards, perhaps. Or perhaps it's just completely the wrong time when the NHS is in such a mess. All our public services are so strained. We keep being told there's not enough money in the pot to provide for even the most basic elements of care. And all of a sudden, this bill has popped up out of nowhere and is barely being given enough time to have the sort of discussion that it warrants, given the gravity of the topic. But where do you stand on this in general? Are you going to back this bill? Or otherwise, if you're not, would you still be pro another form of the bill?
Well, I'm obviously here in Parliament, came down again very early this morning for this important debate. I've just stepped out of the chamber to speak to you because I think it is important to inform the public about what's going on today. So it's important to step out for a couple of minutes and have this conversation with you. So I have looked very carefully at this bill. It's not a whipped vote. In fact, in Reform, we're split on the way we're voting on it. And I know that you'll never please anybody. What I would say is, compared to the abortion bill, which was a disgrace by Labour this week, I can't believe that went through with 2 hours debate, totally changed the abortion laws in this country. Well, I'd love to come on and talk to you about that. That was shocking behaviour by the government. This bill has been debated a lot, to be fair, in Parliament. This is the second time the second full day we've sat on a Friday to debate this again. Obviously, it's been around before. My position is this. I, from a legal point of view, have been through it very carefully. I believe that the controls that are in place are sufficient to start this off. I do think it's something that we do need to be looking at. This current vote today only applies to those people that very sadly have been given less than 6 months to live, 6 months or less to live. It does not apply to anybody that may fall into a mental health reason for feeling that they want to die. It is a physical diagnosis of a physical problem. And so it's going to normally, I think, in this very tight control, be cancer patients will be your most obvious example. I think we do as a country need to start looking at this whole issue. It's very personal. I nursed my dad through cancer to the end. He lived with me, and I was his nurse right through to the time he died at home. And I know what the last few bits were like. So people do have personal stories, but this does not put anybody who is not in that very tight category at risk of abuse or coercion. It doesn't affect anyone under 18, which I firmly believe, and voted against that amendment, firmly believe it shouldn't. It doesn't include anyone that could fall, as I say, into a mental health capacity, or even those people that have long-term but manageable drugs conditions. They don't fall into this either. This is those people that have got a terminal diagnosis within 6 months. It's a very tight control. I've also looked at the people that will be assessing it and who's signing this off. And I think that we do need to start thinking about this. And I think that this is a safe place today to start. So I actually will be voting in favour of it.
Well, it is, of course, a free vote there. And like you said, reform not whipping anybody, people divided on this issue. And it is the job of parliamentarians to follow their own heart, or indeed maybe their own faith on this one. Before I let you go, Sarah, I mean, what's your reaction to the news today that pro-Palestine activists, actually, these aren't the usual short-fringed placard-wearing, kafir touting leftist lunatics that we normally get. Apparently, the Palestinian Action Group are quite a gnarly lot. They're quite criminal. They've actually before tried to attack people with sledgehammers. So what's your reaction to them managing to get access to RAF planes at one of our biggest military air bases in Brize Norton?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. This is just coming through now, this news. In fact, in Parliament, there was just literally, before I came out to speak to you, a call by one of the Conservative MPs for a statement by the Secretary of State for Defence, because this is serious. Look, how did they get in is the first question. That is very concerning. How did they get into this base? How did they get to these planes? That needs to be a priority. Oh my goodness, how frightening is that? And it begs the question of, look, let's wait for the investigation, but I would have deep concerns about how they've got in there. And I should also say that this is effectively treason. This is, let's not beat around the bush. These people should be arrested and thrown into prison without their Sky TV and without their meals and their kettle in their room. They should be thrown into, you know what I'd do with them? I'd send them back to where they've come from, British citizens or not. I'd strip them of their British citizenship because this is treason, and I'd send them back to wherever they've come from. But the point is, this is not, as you say, like we get on a daily basis outside Parliament, your professional protesters. These are hardcore criminals that are committing treason and need to be treated very, very severely.
Sarah Pochin, MP for Runcorn and Helsby for Reform UK, thank you ever so much.